I raised her with my own two hands after her mother passed. And yet, on the night before Christmas Eve, my own daughter looked me straight in the eye and called me a loser. Said I wasn't man enough to give her the wedding she deserved. $45,000. Like I was some kind of ATM. And the man standing behind her, the slick, rich father-in-law, Gary, he smirked. He knew he'd already paid for everything. He wanted me humiliated. And that's when it hit me. If they thought they could write me out of my own daughter's life, they had no idea what kind of man they were dealing with. They thought I was finished, but I was just getting started. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I'll never forget the sting in my chest that night. I'd spent decades on factory floors at General Electric, calluses deep in my palms, overtime shifts piled higher than snowbanks in Buffalo winters. Every dime I saved was for Laura, for her future, for her dreams. And in one cold breath, she made it clear my sacrifices were nothing compared to Gary's checkbook. I drove back home through the Christmas lights of Queens, their glow mocking me, each twinkling bulb like a reminder that the season was supposed to mean family, warmth, gratitude. Instead, I felt like the odd man out, uninvited at my own blood celebration. My apartment smelled faintly of pine from a half-decorated tree, the kind of man puts up alone just to remember he's still alive. I poured a cheap whiskey, stared at the snow drifting past the street lamp outside, and thought about every time I'd patch her skin knees. Every winter I'd worked double, so she'd have presents under the tree. She erased it all with one cruel sentence. And that night, as the city's carolers sang Silent Night down the block, I whispered to myself, she has no idea who raised her. She has no idea what truth I've kept buried all these years. The question wasn't if I would act. It was how. And when the time came, the answer would shatter her perfect little Christmas world forever. I woke up the next morning with that sentence still echoing in my head. Loser. It rattled around my skull louder than the garbage trucks outside. I brewed a bitter pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table with my old checkbook, and stared at numbers that didn't add up. $12,000 in savings. That was my nest egg, my cushion after 35 years of G. It wasn't enough for Laura. She wanted $45,000 for flowers, ice sculptures, and some picture-perfect winter wonderland. I should have said no. Any sane man would have said no. But guilt is a powerful weapon, especially when it's wielded by your own child. I convinced myself that maybe if I found the money, maybe if I gave her everything she wanted, she'd see me as more than a worn-down factory worker. Maybe she'd remember who stood by her side when no one else did. So I walked into that bank, the one with wreaths and windows and a fake Santa ringing a bell outside. I signed papers with numbers I didn't fully understand. 18% interest, $35,000. My hand shook as I wrote my name, because deep down I knew I was mortgaging more than my future. I was selling off pieces of my dignity just to buy my way into her heart. The loan officer smiled like a salesman who just closed a deal on a lemon. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Andrews," he said. "Merry Christmas." Indeed, I walked out with a check burning a hole in my coat pocket, snow crunching under my boots, and for a brief moment, I felt proud. Like I'd done the impossible. Like maybe, just maybe, this was my shot to win her back. But that pride didn't last. Because when I showed up at Laura's door, the lights of her fiancé's mansion sparkling like Rockefeller Plaza itself, I found out the cruelest truth of all. Gary had already paid for everything. I stood there in the foyer of that oversized mansion, check still in my pocket, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. The place smelled of cinnamon and cedar, like some magazine spread on Christmas luxury living. And then Laura appeared at the top of the staircase, draped in silk, her eyes lighting up, not for me, but for the man behind me, Gary. He walked in with that smug half-grin, the kind only men born into money can afford. "Dad," Laura said, but her gaze slid past me. She meant him. She always meant him. My chest tightened. I cleared my throat, pulled the envelope out, and held it up like some kind of offering. "I brought you the money, sweetheart. Every cent you asked for." She hesitated, then laughed, actually laughed. "Dad, you didn't have to do that. Gary already took care of it all." The venue, the decorations, even the snow machines. Everything's covered. Covered. That word cut deeper than any insult, because what she really meant was, I wasn't needed. All those sleepless nights, all the shifts, the overtime, the backaches, the holidays spent in a factory while she slept warm in her bed, none of it mattered. Gary's money erased me in a single stroke. I looked down at the envelope, my hand trembling. $35,000 in borrowed cash, now as useless as a broken light bulb. She didn't even reach for it. Didn't care what it cost me. Something cracked inside me then. I smiled, nodded, stuffed the envelope back into my coat. Of course. Gary always has everything covered. My voice sounded calm, but my blood boiled like a kettle. That night, while they toasted champagne under twinkling lights, I drove back through the storm, the check untouched. And as the snow whipped across the windshield, I swore to myself, this wasn't just waste. This was betrayal, and betrayal as a price. I sat at my kitchen table that night, the envelope still sealed, staring at it like it was some cursed object. $35,000 borrowed at 18% interest. Money I no longer needed, money that would drown me if I kept it. My old coffee pot hissed in the background, the bitter smell filling the room. I picked up the phone, called the bank, and told them I wanted out. The woman on the other end spoke with the kind of cheer that doesn't fit bad news. Of course, Mr. Andrews, but there will be a $600 early cancellation fee. $600. Just like that, gone. For nothing. I hung up and sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of my refrigerator. That's when the truth started to settle in. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what she thought of me, about how little she valued the years I'd given her. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting to the half-decorated Christmas tree in the corner. A couple of ornaments from decades past clung to the branches. Laura's kindergarten paper star, Ellen's favorite glass angel. They looked so out of place now, relics from a family that no longer existed. My mind replayed Laura's voice. Gary already covered it. She said it with pride, with a glow that used to be reserved for me. And then the word that echoed louder, loser. That's what she saw when she looked at me. Not a man who'd sacrificed, not the father who raised her alone, but dead weight she had to cut loose. The snow outside had piled high against the window, muffling the city noise. I sat there in that quiet, feeling the distance between us grow colder than the storm. And that's when I realized, if she could erase me this easily, maybe it was time I erased her too. The invitation came a week later, slid under my door like some cruel joke. Heavy cardstock, embossed letters, little silver snowflakes twinkling along the edges. Laura and Troy's Winter Wonderland Wedding. The kind of thing you'd expect from a glossy magazine spread. Not from the girl I once rocked to sleep in a one-bedroom apartment with the radiator clanking all night. I read the details twice. Every event was there, the engagement party, the dress fitting, the rehearsal dinner, and not once was I listed as a participant. Not the father walking her down the aisle, not a toast, not even a mention, just a guest, an afterthought. At the engagement party, I showed up in my best suit, the one I'd worn at Ellen's funeral, pressed and polished. The place was lit up like Macy's window displays, garlands, poinsettias, a jazz trio playing Christmas standards. I tried to hold my head high, but I could feel the whispers. People looked at me like I didn't belong. And then Laura, my own flesh and blood, made it official. She pulled me aside, her perfume sharp, her smile rehearsed. Dad, maybe it's better if you skip the dress fitting. The boutique is, well, upscale. I don't want you feeling uncomfortable. I stood there frozen. Not angry, not yet, just hollow. She didn't even realize the knife she twisted. She thought she was protecting me. What she was really doing was erasing me. I forced a smile, nodded like I agreed. Sure, sweetheart, whatever you need. But as I sipped flat champagne and watched Gary hold court in his designer suit, laughing with her like he'd raised her, a thought hit me so hard, I nearly dropped my glass. If she was cutting me out piece by piece, maybe it was time I started keeping score. The dress fitting was supposed to be one of those moments a father treasures. A proud smile, maybe a few tears, the kind of memory that stays sharp even when the years blur. Instead, I wasn't even invited inside. I stood across the street from the boutique, watching through frosted windows as mannequins in silk gowns shimmered under golden lights. Inside, Laura twirled in front of mirrors, veil cascading down like snowfall. And who was by her side? Gary, clapping, nodding, sliding his credit card like it was nothing. I felt the cold bite through my coat, but it wasn't the winter air that stung. It was the way she leaned into him, the way she glowed when he approved. That was supposed to be my place, my moment, my little girl, looking to me for reassurance. Instead, I was just another face in the street, watching strangers live a memory that should have been mine. A woman passing by gave me a look, probably wondering why an old man lingered in the snow staring into a bridal shop. I turned away, embarrassed, and ducked into a nearby diner. The smell of frying bacon and burnt coffee hit me, like comfort food for a broken soul. I slid into a booth, staring at the chip formica table, trying to swallow the ache in my throat. I thought about Ellen then, what she'd say if she saw this. She'd tell me to hold my head high, to remember who I was. But all I felt was small, unwanted, forgotten. I stirred the sugar into my coffee and whispered to myself, she doesn't even know who I am anymore. And then, with a shiver that had nothing to do with the weather, another thought followed. Maybe she never did. The wedding invitation said the ceremony started at 11 o'clock sharp. I arrived 10 minutes early, brushing snow off my shoulders, clutching a small wrapped gift. The church was already quiet, too quiet. Doors closed, music muffled. My stomach sank. I pulled one open, and the sound hit me, an organ swelling with, "O come, all ye faithful." Rows of guests turned, eyes locking on me, but not with welcome, with surprise, with confusion. And then I saw it, Laura, arm in arm with Gary, halfway down the aisle. My spot, my role, the one thing I had dreamed of since she was a child. Gone. My breath caught. I checked the card again, 11 o'clock. But the ceremony was already in full swing. Later, I'd learned the truth. The invitation sent to me had been misprinted. 10 o'clock was the real start. Misprinted. That word rolled through my brain like thunder. No misprint is that precise. This was deliberate. A setup, a knife hidden behind a smile. I stood frozen at the back. The scent of pine garlands heavy in the air. The stained glass glowing with morning light. Laura didn't even glance over her shoulder. She was radiant, yes, but radiant for him. For Gary. I slid into the last pew, my hands trembling, heart hammering in my chest. Every eye in the church felt like judgment, like pity, the kind of pity you don't shake off. And as the priest's words echoed, about family, about unity, about love, I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, because in that moment I knew. They hadn't just taken my place at the altar. They'd stolen the very last thread connecting me to her. But I also knew something else. Misprints can be corrected, and when I corrected this one, it would leave a mark they'd never forget. The reception hall looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting, except bigger, shinier, colder. Christmas trees in every corner, garlands draped over chandeliers, waiters in red bow ties weaving through the crowd with silver trays of champagne. I stood near the back, trying to disappear into the wallpaper. But it didn't matter. The whispers found me anyway. That's him. I heard one woman murmur, the real father, the factory guy. I lifted a glass just to steady my hand, the bubbles fizzing like static in my ears. And then came the toast. Laura rose, veil gone, eyes sparkling, a microphone in her hand. I just want to thank everyone who made this day possible, she said, her voice carrying through the hall. Especially Gary, who's been more of a father to me than I ever dreamed of. The room erupted in applause. I felt the air leave my lungs. More of a father? My grip tightened on the glass until I thought it might shatter. Guests clapped, laughed. Some even stood to cheer. And me? I was left standing in the shadows, humiliated in front of 200 people. My name erased from her story in real time. Gary raised his glass toward her, beaming like the hero he thought he was. My reflection in the champagne flute looked old, worn down, out of place. But inside me, something different stirred. Not sadness, not even shame. Anger. Pure, focused, righteous anger. I didn't slam the glass. I didn't storm out. No, I set it down carefully, straightened my tie, and smiled. Because right then, I decided, if they wanted to pretend Gary was her father, fine. Let them. But before this was over, they'd learn who I really was. And the truth would burn brighter than all their Christmas lights combined. I left the reception early, the sound of carols and clinking glasses echoing behind me. Outside, the snow fell in heavy sheets, muffling the city like a thick blanket. My boots crunched against the frozen pavement as I walked to my car, every step heavier than the last. I didn't turn on the radio. Didn't need to. My head was already loud enough. Back at my apartment, I sat in the dark, the only light coming from the half-decorated Christmas tree. That glass angel Ellen had loved so much hung crooked on a branch, catching what little glow remained. I poured myself a whiskey, no ice, and stared at the photograph on the mantel. Laura at 10 years old, missing front teeth, holding my hand on a Coney Island boardwalk. Back then, she looked at me like I was the whole world. Now, I was nothing but a shadow at her wedding. I thought about all the lies I'd let live, all the truths I'd buried, for her sake, for her future, for peace. And now, that peace was gone. She'd chosen humiliation over gratitude, betrayal over loyalty. I opened a drawer of my old desk and pulled out the envelope. Not the check, the other one. The one I'd kept sealed for decades. Inside was a letter. The truth about who she really was, where she came from, how Ellen and I had brought her into our home after tragedy, raised her as our own, never once letting her doubt she was loved. My hands trembled as I held it. This wasn't a weapon I ever wanted to use, but they'd left me no choice. Because sometimes the only way to fight a lie is with the sharpest truth imaginable. And when she read it, her perfect little world would crack like ice under heavy boots. Christmas morning, while the city woke to church bells and the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting from brownstones, I wrapped the envelope in plain paper and slid it under Laura's pile of glittering gifts. Her name written in my neat block letters, from Dad. No bows, no gold ribbon, just a weight of truth waiting to be opened. The apartment felt colder than usual that day. I didn't go to their big brunch. Didn't sit at the table lined with silverware and poinsettias. Instead, I sat in my recliner, the TV muted, watching the snow pile high on the fire escape. My phone buzzed with notifications. Photos posted online, Laura glowing in her gown, Gary at her side, everyone clinking mimosas like they were starring in a holiday commercial. Not a trace of me, not even a mention. Hours later, the call came. Her voice cracked through the static, panicked, desperate. Dad, what is this? Tell me this isn't true. I stared at the phone, watched it light up with her name, again and again. I let it ring until the sound became almost musical, a carol of its own. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt calm. Not happy, not joyful, but steady, like a man who'd finally laid down a burden he'd carried too long. Outside, the snowflakes caught in the street lamp's glow, falling silent and endless. Somewhere across town, Laura was unwrapping not just presents, but her entire identity. And I knew, when the truth cuts that deep, it doesn't just sting, it scars. And scars, they never let you forget. The next day, my voicemail was full. Her voice shifted with every message, first confusion, then rage, then pleading. Why would you keep this from me? How could you? You're lying. Tell me you're lying. I sat at the kitchen table, listening to each one, the coffee in my mug growing cold. Not once did she say thank you. Not once did she remember all the nights I held her when she cried, all the sacrifices I made. To her, the truth was just another wound. To me, it was the only cure. By noon, Gary called. His voice was sharp, polished, dripping with that country club arrogance. Brett, whatever game you're playing, stop it. You've embarrassed her enough. You're finished. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Men like Gary think their money is enough to crush anyone. I laughed, actually laughed. Finished. I said, "You don't even know where the finish line is." Then I hung up. I went for a walk through the neighborhood. Snow sloshing under my boots. Families were building snowmen. Kids dragging sleds down the sidewalks. I must have looked like a ghost drifting through all that joy. But inside me, something was alive again. A fire I thought had burned out years ago. They thought the letter was the end. No, it was just the first crack in their perfect snow globe world. Because when the glass breaks, the fake snow stops swirling. And what's left underneath is reality. And reality, my reality, had only just begun to show its teeth. 2 days after Christmas, I saw her. Laura. She showed up at my apartment unannounced. Her designer coat dusted with snow, eyes red from crying, or maybe from anger. She stood in the doorway, shaking, letter clutched in her hand like it was a live grenade. "Why didn't you tell me?" "All these years you let me believe." Her voice cracked, but I didn't move to comfort her. Not this time. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit." She didn't. She just stood there, trembling. "You lied to me my entire life." I leaned forward, elbows on the table, steady as a stone. "I gave you a life. I gave you love. And you threw it all away for a man with deeper pockets." My words landed heavy, and for a flicker of a second, I saw something in her eyes, shame. But it vanished quick, swallowed up by pride. "You humiliated me," she snapped. "In front of everyone." Gary says. That was it. That name. Gary. I slammed my fist on the table, the sound echoing off the walls. Gary doesn't get to rewrite history. Gary didn't pick you up from school when you were sick. Gary didn't work double shifts so you could have Christmas gifts under the tree. Gary didn't bury his wife and still find the strength to raise you alone. I did. Silence. Just a ragged breath. The old radiator hissing. Then she dropped the letter onto the table, as if it burned her, and stormed out without another word. The door slammed, rattling the picture frames on the wall. I sat there alone, the truth lying between us like a broken ornament. But for the first time, I didn't feel weak. I felt ready. Because this wasn't the end of my revenge. This was only the second act. New Year's Eve arrived, and while the city lit up with fireworks and champagne, I kept to myself. No parties, no noise. Just me, a glass of whiskey, and the faint sound of laughter drifting from neighboring apartments. I thought of Laura in some penthouse suite, dressed in sequins, Gary's arm draped around her like he owned her. The image twisted my gut, but not with sadness anymore. With resolve. I knew what was coming next. Gary would do everything in his power to bury the truth, to paint me as bitter, senile, spiteful. Men like him don't fight fair. They fight with influence, with money, with whispers at country clubs. And if I let it, his version of the story would become the story. But I had something stronger than money. Memory, evidence, proof of every sacrifice, every moment she'd forgotten, old photos, letters Ellen wrote before she passed, even documents that tied Laura's real story back to that tragic night when fate put her in my arms. Pieces of a puzzle they couldn't erase no matter how hard they tried. So while the fireworks cracked across the skyline, I opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were snapshots of a life built on sweat and love, birthday parties in cramped kitchens, Christmas mornings with hand-knitted stockings, Laura asleep on my chest after Ellen's funeral. Proof that I wasn't the loser she claimed. Proof that I was her father in every way that counted. I set the box on the table, heart pounding. If Gary wanted war, he'd get one, because when the clock struck midnight, I made my resolution. This year, I wasn't going to fade into background. This year, I was going to take my place back, no matter the cost. The weeks that followed were quiet on the surface, but I could feel the storm brewing underneath. Word got around fast. Gary whispering his version of the story into every ear that mattered. At the diner, I overheard two men at the counter. "Did you hear about Laura's dad?" Bitter old guy, made up some crazy story to ruin her big day. My blood boiled, but I kept my head down, sipping burnt coffee. Let them talk. Because while Gary spun lies, I was preparing something he couldn't spin. I made copies of Ellen's letters, the adoption papers. Even the hospital report from that night all those years ago. Hard proof. I tucked each piece into a leather folder, the kind lawyers carry, heavy with the weight of history. Then came the fundraiser. Gary's pride and joy. An annual charity gala, black tie, champagne towers, and cameras flashing like fireworks. Laura would be there too, smiling for photographs, pretending her life was perfect. That was my chance. My stage. I stood in front of the mirror that night, adjusting my tie, smoothing back the gray in my hair. For the first time in months, I didn't see a man beaten down. I saw a man sharpening himself like a blade. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew they'd try to shut me down, laugh me out of the room. But I had the truth in my hands, and once spoken in public, truth has a way of echoing louder than lies. As I stepped out into the cold, the winter air cut sharp against my face, but it felt good, clean, like the world was bracing itself. And I whispered under my breath, "Tonight, the masks come off." What I didn't know then was just how far Gary would go to stop me. The gala shimmered like a palace of glass. Crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and a string quartet playing carols so delicate they felt unreal. I walked in head high, folder tucked under my arm like a weapon. No one stopped me. Not yet. People barely noticed me, their eyes fixed on Gary as he held court, laughing too loud, his tuxedo gleaming under the lights. Laura stood beside him, radiant but hollow, her smile stretched tight, like it might snap. I waited until the toast began. Gary tapped his glass. The room fell silent, and he launched into performance. Family is the foundation of everything we do. His voice carried smooth, like butter melting over warm bread. People clapped, nodded, ate it up. That's when I moved. I stepped into the light, folder in hand, my voice steady as I cut through the applause. Funny thing about family, Gary, it's not always who pays the bills. Sometimes it's who pays with their life. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras turned. Laura's face drained to color. Gary's smile faltered. I opened the folder, pulled out Ellen's letter, her handwriting looping across the page. This is my wife's voice from the grave. Proof of where Laura came from. Proof of who I am. Proof of what money can't buy. Murmurs erupted, sharp and rising. Guests leaned in, whispers colliding like sparks. Gary stepped forward, fury in his eyes, trying to snatch the papers. But I held them high, unshakable. You can buy snow machines, orchestras, champagne fountains. I said, voice booming now. But you can't buy the truth. And you sure as hell can't buy me. The room froze. Laura stared at me, trembling, caught between two worlds. And in that silence, I knew the next words I spoke would decide everything. For a moment, the gala hall was frozen. Just a hush of breath, the clink of a glass tipping somewhere in the crowd. I looked at Laura. She couldn't move, couldn't blink, her hands clutching the hem of her gown, like it might keep her from falling. Gary finally broke the silence, his voice booming, desperate. This man is bitter, a fraud, trying to ruin my family's night. But the damage was done. I lifted Ellen's letter higher, the words echoing as I read. Brett, she'll never know the pain of her parents' accident. She'll only know love. Promise me that. My voice cracked on that last line, but it wasn't weakness. It was truth. Raw, undeniable truth. The crowd turned. Whispers grew sharp, cutting through Gary's bluster. A woman gasped. A man muttered, "My God, he's telling the truth." Faces that sneered at me hours before now looked at Gary with suspicion, with disdain. He reached for Laura's shoulder, but she pulled away, tears spilling down her cheeks. Publicly, visibly, that was the first crack in his mask. The second came when a reporter pushed forward, camera flashing. "Mr. Wallace, did you knowingly keep this from your daughter-in-law?" Gary sputtered, red-faced, words failing him for the first time all night. And there it was, the mighty man undone, not by fists, not by force, but by truth. I closed the folder, tucked it under my arm, and walked toward the exit. No need to gloat, no need to linger. Behind me, I heard Laura sobbing, guests murmuring, Gary shouting into the void. His empire of appearances collapsing in real time. Outside, the snow was falling again, soft and endless. I drew in the cold air, let it fill my lungs. For the first time in decades, I felt light. Free. I whispered to the night, to Ellen, to myself, "Merry Christmas." And I walked away, leaving Gary in ruins and taking back the only thing he could never buy, my dignity. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.